and we need to acknowledge that there may be something that we can learn.
Well, I'm glad you're saying that, David, but, I mean, who's doing it? It looks like we're going back to where we were, this freewheeling free market.
Well, there's you and me, right? We're having this conversation.
Yeah.
We're having this conversation.
Yeah,
but no,
Yeah.
I worry that you're right. I worry that there hasn't been the kind of response that the last crisis should have brought. In fact, I think it's quite likely that in 10 or 15 years we'll look back on that last crisis and say that the problem was not that it was so big, it's that it wasn't big enough. It wasn't big enough to get us to move away from a system that is promoting inequality, that is not addressing our social needs, that is enabling the few to dictate political outcomes, and that has essentially taken the best system in the world and had it fall behind in terms not just of economic performance, but in terms of how it's viewed by everybody else. At the very beginning of the book, I have a conversation with a Obama administration official, one who's actually been in the news a lot recently, and that official said to me, the Chinese think they won the crisis. And I said, well, what did you mean? And he said, well, they think that we've become distracted by it and discredited by it, and that gives them more playing field to succeed and to influence. And I think that's something we ought to take very, very seriously because they're playing for keeps, just like everybody else in the world is.
Another call for our guest, David Rothkopf. Here's Phil in Baltimore. Go right ahead, Phil.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I'll make one brief. I was just wondering what he thought of Edward Bellamy, in the sense that you've not at all touched, and I guess because it's such a political lightning rod, anything about a much stronger world government. It seems to me that these are so big, you can't deal with them country by country.
Yes, yeah. Well, I was just going to ask that in terms of the United States anyway. I mean, and I think you make that point a lot, that these companies can just move on to another state if they don't like their welcome there.
Right. Well, I actually, in the book, I do go into this in quite a bit of length because, I see the world situation a little bit akin to what the situation was in the United States in the 19th century, where you had civil war, and then followed by, the railways and others knitting us together into a national economy, and some big companies, Standard Oil, Carnegie, and others, taking advantage of that national economy without actually having interstate commerce laws. And they were able to just sort of run rampant and crush competition. And it took us 20, 30 years to try to rein them back in, which we did with only limited success. Mm-hmm. On the global stage now, we don't have those regulatory mechanisms. And the only way that you can deal with global derivative markets, or you can deal with setting global climate policy, or you can deal with global health, environmental, labor, trade, other kinds of issues, is with stronger global governance mechanisms. Now, that could be a global government, or it could be treaties among governments, but you need something. And the problem, as the caller rightly says, is that if a politician runs for office and says, I want to cede a little bit of our sovereignty up into some international mechanism, they're finished. That's the third rail in politics. They can't have that conversation anymore. Right. And yet, I would argue that over the next 100 years or so, the creation of stronger global institutions to replace the very weak ones we have, and let's remember, they were all created to be weak, will be one of the big stories of the century ahead, because there's no way to manage the world or manage global well-being without treating it like a community and using the legal and governance techniques that we know work from national experience.
And you're saying in closing here, because we're just about out of time, David, that we have to look to a new model, this sort of hybrid capitalism you were speaking about before, not what we've seen. Yeah.
Right. I think there are different models that work well, and I think we ought to be open-minded to it. If you look at Singapore, for example, everybody would say it's very capitalistic, but when I sat with the Singaporean finance minister, his point was the government has a central role to play here. It's our role to ensure opportunity and to enable people to seize that opportunity. And so if we look we can see things, we can adapt, we can embrace them, and we can reinvent ourselves, which is what the U.S. Constitution enables us to do.
Look for David Rothkopf tonight at 7 p.m. in the Edgar Allan Poe room of the Central Library, the Enoch Pratt Free Library here in Baltimore, with his book, Power Incorporated. David Rothkopf, CEO, editor-at-large at Foreign Policy, and make sure you check out that website, too, and the print magazine of Foreign Policy. They're both excellent. David, thanks for your time.
I've really enjoyed it.
Me too. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. I'll see you again tomorrow on Midday.
The executive producer of Midday is Vanessa Eskridge. The producers are Nikki Gamer and Michael Himowitz. Our interns are Galen Druk, Olivia McCleary, Ella Mickle-Tyler, Solomon Scott, and Maki Shiga. Our director and engineer is Tom Welch. Our music is produced by Jeff Truman and High Gravity Sounds. Podcasts of Midday are available at wypr.org. Dan Roderick's column appears each Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday in the Baltimore Sun. This is WYPR, your NPR news station.